last episode or so, we've been following Isaac and Rebecca, a mother who knows what God has told her, and her obedient son Jacob successfully gained the blessing and the birthright. And this made Esau obviously very angry. And for fear of Jacob's life, Rebecca has told him he must leave until his brother calms down. He receives a blessing from his father uh, before he leaves. And now he's on the road. And we are in Genesis chapter 29. We're trying to understand the Bible as far as it is translated correctly. We're using the help of scholars from different faiths. And I'm hoping my children and my great-grandchildren and later posterity, extended family and friends can benefit as we study from these different backgrounds. And I hope that my Christian friends of other faiths can begin to understand the Latter-day Saint mindset when it comes to the Bible and the restored gospel in general. And maybe what we do will make more sense, and we can benefit as well by looking at the scriptures from more angles than just the people that we surround ourselves with. I think that's a healthy attitude in studying scripture. Genesis chapter 29, verse 1. Then Jacob went on his journey and came into the land of the people of the east. And he looked, and behold, a well in the field. And lo, there were 3 flocks of sheep lying by it. For out of that well they watered the flocks, and a great stone was upon the well's mouth. And thither were all the flocks gathered, and they rolled the stone from the well's mouth, and watered the sheep, and put the stone again upon the well's mouth in his place. And Jacob said unto them, My brethren, whence be ye? And they said, Of Haran are we. Now, Joseph Smith translation gives us a little friendlier English that we're used to. My brethren, from whence are ye? And they said, From Haran. And verse 5, and he said unto them, Know ye Laban, the son of Nahor? And they said, We know him. And he said unto them, Is he well? And they said, He is well. And behold, Rachel his daughter cometh with the sheep. And he said, Lo, it is yet high day, neither is it time that the cattle should be gathered together. Water ye the sheep, and go and feed them. And they said, We cannot until the flocks be gathered together, until they roll the stone from the well's mouth. Then we water the sheep. And while he yet spoke with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she kept them. And it came to pass, when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that Jacob went near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth, and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. And this is the same Laban whom has kind of been taking advantage of the wealth of Jacob's father, and it seems to be like this might be a repeat of that type of behavior. Now, verse 11 is surprising. And Jacob kissed Rachel, and lifted up his voice and wept. Wow, that is definitely a confident man. And the fact that he rolled the stone from the well's mouth, I think he's showing off his strength in catching her eye. And he's still filled with, I'm sure, the spirit of the blessing when he encountered God in the last chapter. And he's now walking with God. So he must know more than, this might be more than just romantic attraction. The fact that he kissed her, though, he's a very confident in the Lord and in his first meeting of Rachel. Now, verse 12, and Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's brother. Well, that's nice since he's already kissed her. And that he was Rebekah's son. And she ran and told her father. Now, Jono Vandor says, So Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the people of the east. And it goes on to say he was talking to them there at the well. And he says, Do you know Laban, the son of Nahor? And they say, We know him. So he says, Is he well? And they say, Yes, he is well. And look, his daughter Rachel is coming with the sheep. And enter Rachel. Here she is. And he said, Look, it is still high noon in a sense. It's not time. And it goes on. She comes along with the sheep. He rolls the stone off the well, allows the sheep to be watered. And this is a beautiful story as they're talking. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted his voice and wept. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's relative and that he was Rebekah's son. So she ran and told her father. I think that's just beautiful. And you might wonder why Papa John reads the verses and then paraphrased through Jonah Vandor, our Hebrew scholar from Australia. I have found it important to never skip important verses and paraphrase them. The spirit of the word really does carry weight as you read those actual verses instead of just paraphrasing the story. It seems to lose something, so that's why Papa John does that. Now, our Methodist minister, Keith Johnson, responds to Jonah, yes, I think it's secular. As we talk about what happened with Abraham's servants in chapter 24, and he goes there and he's looking for a wife, and now here comes the son of Isaac who comes and he's looking for the wife, and here she is, and it's secular. It really does seem like these generational patterns do repeat. The one person who is consistent in both stories is Laban, the greedy brother, now a father. He's like, oh, I remember the last time. And I'm sure he's got ideas already on how he might benefit from this chance encounter, or perhaps not so chance encounter. Verse 13. And it came to pass when Laban heard the tidings of Jacob, his sister's son, that he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. And he told Laban all these things. And Laban said unto him, surely thou art my bone and my flesh. And he abode with him for the space of a month. And Laban said unto Jacob, behold, thou art my brother. Shouldest thou therefore serve me for naught? Serve me for naught? Tell me, what shall thy wages be? So he's been there a month. He hasn't asked for any wages. He's probably been helping out with different jobs and chores. And now Laban is offering him wages. And Laban had two daughters. The name of the eldest was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah was tender-eyed, but Rachel was beautiful and well-favored. Now, Keith Johnson, our Methodist minister, adds this. There's this wonderful thing that happens in this that just catches my attention. And it's that Jacob is looking for his family and connection to his family, but he falls for Rachel. It says in verse 16, now Laban had two daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. And then in verse 17 is this thing, I can never get it out of my mind. It says, and Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful of form and faith. So in the King James, it says Leah's eyes were tender, but as you compare other versions of the Bible, the original translation from Hebrew and from the Greek indicates that Leah had some type of sight problem. And then it also talks about Rachel being so beautiful. And Jacob, in verse 18, loved Rachel. And he said, I will serve thee 7 years for Rachel, thy younger daughter. So they've agreed upon terms for 7 years of work. Verse 19, and Laban says, it is better that I give her to thee than that I should give her to another man. Abide with me. So that basically means he's agreed. Verse 20, and Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed unto him but a few days for the love he had for her. And remember how when Jacob realized that this dreadful land was basically the ladder to heaven, the gate of heaven, and he's still just submitting to the Lord, and now he's probably just submitting to Rachel in ways that he just thinks about her all the time and he wants to please her, and no request or no favor she might ask of him is too heavy. It seems like very light. That reminds me of how Christ promises that his burden is light. And once you have that encounter with divinity and you just surrender to God, his ways become a delight instead of a burden. I think that's what the scriptures are describing here. Now, years ago, Papa John wrote this. It seems amazing that from verse 19 to 20, that 7 years have passed with so little history recorded. Yeah, we went from one verse to the next. Even more amazing is these 7 years passed so quickly, and it seemed to Jacob to be but a few days. These short verses contain a powerful truth. To endure to the end can seem so hard, but for Jacob it was not. How can that be? What makes the difference? I often hear men say how hard it is to avoid sin, to avoid pornography, to avoid temptations. They express how they want to be faithful to God. If only I could have the Spirit with me all week like I feel when I'm at church, they say. Well, Paul Washer, and he comes from the background that Brigham Young came back from, as far as he's a Calvinist, very, hellfire and damnation type of belief in God. But I love this quote from Paul Washer, and he's alive today. Same Calvinist background, but not the same time period as Brigham Young. Paul Washer puts it best when he says, a lot of people think that Christianity is doing all the righteous things you hate and avoiding all the wicked things you love in order to go to heaven. No, that is a lost man with religion. A Christian is a person whose heart has been changed and they have new affections. That is so powerful and so simple, but yet so profound. I remember the first time that quote, I heard it from Paul Washer, and it just resonated with me. Now, Papa John, my notes continue. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with my wife, Shauna Lee, discussing with one of my sons. This was actually my younger son, Isaac. And perhaps I've talked about this before, but it's interesting. I actually took the time to write about this encounter. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my wife, Shauna Lee, discussing with one of my sons this concept of love and loyalty for God and how it sounds so weak to say it's hard to whatever, overcome this or to be faithful. And to make the point, I turned to my sweetheart and I took her by the hand, looked her in the eyes, and began expressing how much I love her. Honey, I love you so much. You mean the world to me. How blessed I am to be married to you. We have such a bright future together, don't we? But it's just so hard to be faithful to you. Wow, I just remember Isaac's response. He was shocked by what I'd said, and he understood instantly how shallow such comments and compliments really are, and expose a greater flaw than the sin or the weakness that is bemoaned by the struggling believer. The real problem is a matter of not loving God. I'm sorry. The real problem is a matter of not loving God or not knowing God. I love the LDS hymn number 324, Rise Up, O Men of God, which begins with these words, Rise up, Rise up, O men of God, have done with lesser things. And it's a powerful hymn and continues from there. It is obvious that Jacob knows and trusts God and loves Rachel. He is empowered and motivated beyond his own strength by such devotion. So much so that he's willing to endure many trials and many years of hard work because of the promise of their future union, which he claims in his mind and heart. Every small or manual task or menial task becomes a delight. These 7 additional years went by faster because of his love for Rachel and the Lord. Jacob's enduring to the end does not have to be a drudgery. It does not need to be mundane and bemoaned. What made the difference? Jacob. Jacob, who becomes Israel soon, combined with his combined love for Rachel and God, changed everything. And the same can happen and be said for each of us. When we are in love, you won't wish for it to end. You're not praying for the end. You don't want it to end. When in relationship with God, we will hope it never ends as well. We can look forward to eternity and beyond and whatever it holds despite our circumstances today. Enduring to the end can sound so terrible. I've heard that so often in church, and it sounds like just this terrible, like, oh, just hang in there. Kind of like a cat when its claws are stuck in the drapes up high on the curtains in the living room. The poor cat has no choice but just to keep hanging in there, enduring to the end, right? But everything changes when we are filled with the true love of Christ. We don't want it to end. May it last forever. It's our choice. It's our choice how we face the future and endure with brightness and hope, full of faith or not. Maybe that's why we read in the scriptures as we approach the end times, specifically Judgment Day, as being described as the great and terrible day of the Lord. And you can find that in Joel and Malachi and perhaps other places. We ultimately, it's up to us. We have a choice. We choose that day to make it great or terrible. When we are truly converted and know and love God, I just say it again, it changes everything. That's been my experience. Now, verse 21, and Jacob said unto Laban, give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go in unto her. Joseph Smith helps clarify a little bit, that I may go and take her, and for my days of serving thee are fulfilled. And Laban gave her to Jacob. Now, back to our Methodist minister. It's Middle Eastern negotiations again. Jacob comes and he says, I would serve for 7 years. And he's like, it's better for me if I give her to you. It's like Abraham when he was talking to the folks at the Machpelah cave, Machpelah cave, and the ground. And he's like, look, what's 400 years between us? What's 400? I'm not years. What's $400 or whatever between us? There's a and so there's a negotiation going on here. He's like, yes, I'll take your 7 years. Nehemiah Gordon, our Hebrew scholar, I always like his insights. He really, I think, helped me more than anyone else. In fact, that's why I think Keith and Jonah like to ask him questions so often, as they try to push the boundaries of their understanding, coming from the Christian faith as a Methodist and a Messianic believer, and as Jonah's discovered Christ as his Messiah, and trying to understand the Judeo roots of his faith. So Nehemiah Gordon says, what's interesting is later on, they make the same comment in chapter 31, verse 15. Jacob is trying to convince Rachel and Leah to go with him back to the land of Canaan and leave their father. And they say, we were considered like foreigners to him. He sold us, meaning we have no loyalty to him. So both of his wives eventually recognized the injustice and how they were treated as collateral, even in Jacob's ability to work for their father and just so he could marry. Initially, he just wanted Rachel, and now he ends up with them both. I'm getting ahead of the story. I'm sorry. He sold us like we were slaves. So they perceive this as kind of as a cold thing for their father to do. Rather than bless his daughters and send them away with some kind of dowry, they sell them into slavery, in a sense, is what they feel. And that's how they saw it. Jono Vandor responds, yes, we see later on as well that Laban says in verse 43 of chapter 31, and Laban answered and said to Jacob, these daughters are my daughters, and these children are my children, and this flock is my flock, and all that you see is mine. Boy, it reminds me of mine, mine, mine from the Seagulls in some animated movies we've all watched. And Jono ends with this comment, and he kind of seems to me to possibly be someone with what Proverbs refer to as an evil eye. Is that possibly a fair speculation, Nehemiah? And Nehemiah responds, I think there's definitely a spirit of Laban here. The spirit of Laban is unjust wages, changing the wage, withholding the wage, requiring unreasonable things from workers. I think in modern terms, maybe we could call this the spirit of Walmart. The spirit of Walmart. Verse 22, and Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. And it came to pass in the evening. So we're back to the story. This is pre-marriage. And Jacob has finished his 7 years, right? So in the evening, that he took Leah, his daughter, and brought her to him, and he went in unto her. Joseph Smith helps clarify. And it came to pass in the evening that he took Leah, his daughter, and brought her to Jacob, and she went in and slept with him. And Laban gave unto his daughter Leah Zilpah. Zilpah is the name of his maid, for a handmaid. So Laban is giving his daughter a handmaid to go with her into this marriage. Verse 25, and it came to pass that in the morning, behold, it was Leah. Jacob shocked, and he said to Laban, what is this that thou hast done unto me? Did not I serve with thee for Rachel? Wherefore then hast thou beguiled me? back to our Methodist minister, Keith Johnson. When I read this verse, I think what happened between Jacob and his brother and what Esau said. It almost sounds exactly the same, but there is a little difference that you can't find or figure out in English, only in the Hebrew. Why then have you deceived me? So in his version of the Bible, the word is deceived versus in the King James where it says beguiled. Now in English, when we see deceived me, what do you think I think of, Jono and Nehemiah? And Nehemiah says, he's deceived me twice. This is a very unusual word for deceived. In Hebrew, that word is akev. So this is probably a more common word, but there's definitely a connection there that you reap what you sow. How appropriate that the one who acted with deception then ended up getting deceived. We would say in modern Hebrew, magao lo, magayo, magaya lo. He had it coming, so magaya lo means he had it coming. But we see this throughout the Bible. We saw before that Lot tried to offer his daughters for rape, and he ended up getting raped by them. I'm so glad to have a little less harsh understanding of that verse, perhaps. And if you go back and read my footnotes, since I've done that broadcast about Lot in Hebrew, who would be Lot, and his daughters, I added some other insights that weren't part of the Papa John episode for that one that helped me appreciate Lot and how he's viewed from other religions, including Islam, as a great prophet. And even in the New Testament, he's referred to as a great prophet. But yet, we're just dealing with the scholars that I'm following at this point, and he's just saying, like Lot kind of got what he deserved in a sense, and this Hebrew word, and he's just making the connection that that's kind of how Laban is going to get. He's going to get what he deserves. In Hebrew, it's called reciprocal justice. That's what they call it. Verse 26, and Laban said, it must not be so in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. And actually, that I believe is an accurate statement, but that's not what Jacob had agreed to. So 27, fulfill her week, and we will give thee this also for the service which thou shalt serve me yet seven other years. Papa John, just for clarification, based upon some of the scholars that I've researched, Jacob did not have to work another 7 years. He's finished 7 years, and basically Laban has pulled a slick willie on him and tricked him into marrying Leah. But if he works another week, he can have Rachel too. I just feel good for Jacob to not have to work 7 more years. So continuing, Laban asked him to work another 7 years for Rachel, but he married Rachel 1 week after he married Leah. So even though he's got to work, I suppose, to clarify, he's got to work 7 years, but he gets to marry her after 1 week as he works into this second 7-year period. 2 wives, and they are sisters. What could go wrong with that, right? Then Jacob worked off 7 years as agreed. I wonder if the second 7 years went slower than the first. I don't know. Definitely a life twist. I didn't see that coming. I've heard this story many times, but I'm sure Jacob was not expecting this. Verse 28, and Jacob did so and fulfilled her week, and he gave Rachel his daughter to wife also. And Laban gave to Rachel his daughter Bilhah his handmaid. So now Rachel gets the gift of Bilhah, his handmaid, to be her maid in her new life as a wife to Jacob. Verse 30, and he went in also unto Rachel, and he loved her also, Rachel more than Leah, and served with him yet 7 other years. Now, Nehemiah Gordon, I love some of this. Let me share with you some more insights from Nehemiah. He goes, I want to bring something from Deuteronomy chapter 24, verses 14 to 15, because we're reading these stories, but I think they're more than just stories. I think they're lessons for us to learn. For example, in Deuteronomy, it says, "You shall not oppress a hired worker, a poor person, or a pauper from your brother, or for the sojourner in your land, in your gates." And remember, a sojourner is a foreigner. It's basically someone who's from another land, but he's living in your land. He continues, what does that mean? The word oppress, there is a word in Hebrew that implies to take advantage of, treat unfairly, or to swindle. Any of those things is called to oppress somebody. Then it says in verse 15, in his days you'll give his wage. The sun shall not set upon him, for he is poor. Basically, he needs it. It's a rough translation, but basically that he not call against you to Yehovah, and there be no sin upon you. It was somebody like Jacob, who was a foreigner, who didn't have any property, who was essentially landless and homeless, who came to Laban and said, remember, Jacob ran from his parents' home for safety from his brother Esau. He doesn't own anything, but he now is walking with God, but he doesn't have land or property. So Nehemiah continues. So when he comes to Laban, he says, okay, give me a job. If you withhold that wage, though, he'll call against Jehovah, and there will be a sin upon you. That's actually a very serious commandment here. I think one that our Western society, we don't take very seriously. I don't know that it has to be literally interpreted that you have to pay your workers every single day if the agreement is to pay them at the end of every week. But the point is, you better pay them at the time that you're supposed to pay them. If you don't, that's actually a very serious sin in the Hebrew culture. That's a good insight. Now, Keith Johnson, back to our Methodist minister. There's a book in the New Testament that Martin Luther didn't like, and some of the other people didn't like it, and that's the book of James. I'm going to interrupt here. If you don't realize it, the book of James, you know who James is? James is the half brother of Jesus Christ. And he's saying that Martin Luther, who began the Lutheran religion, who helped the protest against the Catholics, who led the Protestant Reformation in a sense, Martin Luther didn't like the book of James, who was the half brother of Jesus Christ. And another tidbit just from Papa John, I've learned this somewhere in the past, James, that wasn't his actual name, but because the King James translators wanted to honor King James, every time there was anyone named Jacob, or in Hebrew, Yaakov, I don't pronounce it exactly very well, it's hard for my tongue, but Jacob in Hebrew became James in the King James Bible. So, but the point being, Martin Luther and many other early fathers of Christianity did not like the book of James. And why is that? Well, you read the book of James, and it's a hard time to justify the belief of saved by grace and no works are required. Whereas the Hebrew understands to believe is to act. It's an active faith. It's not a passive faith. It's not like the Greek scholars just doing mental exercises. Now I digress. I went way off script here. So Martin Luther called the book of James an epistle of straw. He called it that because it didn't suit his theology. So again, I hope my friends from other faiths can understand where the restored gospel would love the book of James. In fact, Joseph Smith, as a young boy, that's the book that inspired him to pray in the grove as he read from the book of James, that led to his first vision and led to the restoration of the gospel. In our best attempts to go back to the original history, language, and context, and to be the most Judeo-Christian religion in the 1800s. Now, I'm not sure we've done a great job of it, but that's okay. It's just our turn to get it almost right, like every other culture and religion. But I hope that helps you understand how we highly love the book of James, whereas many other religions are suspect about that. But back to our Methodist minister, Keith Johnson. He says, there's a section in the book of James that says this: come now, you rich people, weep and howl for your miseries which are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted and your garments have become moth-eaten. your gold and your silver have rusted. And then it says, behold, the pay of the laborers who mowed your fields, and which has been withheld by you, cries out against you, and the outcry of those who did the harvesting has reached the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. It's reached the ears of Jehovah Sabaoth, and you have lived luxuriously. So this is usury at a very high level. And that Lord of Sabaoth is Yehovah of Sabaoth in Hebrew. What does Sabaoth mean? It has nothing to do with the Sabbath. This is the God of armies. This is the God of judgment. And you're going to see this term, Lord of Sabaoth, Yehovah of Sabaoth, throughout the Old Testament and into the scriptures, even in the book of Revelation. And just understand, this is a God of judgment, God of angers, of army, and a sense of anger for the injustice that people have caused. Now back again to Nehemiah. No, this is Keith Johnson. And it tells this story. When I read that, I'm like, wow, James is really coming on strong here. But if I don't read Deuteronomy, and I understand that's where this actually was, and I don't understand this actually was brought forth prior in Deuteronomy, before James is simply pulling for Deuteronomy to remind the people that this is one of the teachings in the Torah, the Tanakh. I'm bringing this example because I think one of the things that happens is that we read in a vacuum in Christianity sometimes. In my tradition, in the Methodist tradition, we'll go over the New Testament. It'll be completely read in a vacuum without understanding where it comes from. And what you just did, Nehemiah, is you brought to my mind something I knew in James, but I did not know in Deuteronomy as well. Now it makes complete sense. Thank you for that. And I thank Keith Johnson, our Methodist scholar, for his open dialogue with this Hebrew scholar. And as a member of the Restored Gospel in the latter days, I love being able to compare the different backgrounds, and I hope that this is beneficial for anyone listening to these Papa John episodes. Verse 31, and when Yehovah saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. And Leah conceived and bare a son, and she called his name Reuben. For she said, surely Yehovah hath looked upon my affliction. Now therefore my husband will love me. And she conceived again and bare a son, and said, because Yehovah hath heard that I was hated, he hath therefore given me this son also. And she called his name Simon, or that would be in Hebrew, Simeon, something like that. And 34, and she conceived again. This is 3 times. And poor Rachel, but poor Leah, there's this division, and they are both having to face. Leah faces the fact that she's not her husband's favorite, and Rachel's facing the fact that she is barren up until this point. Verse 34, she conceived again and bare a son, and said, now this time will my husband be joined unto me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore was his name called Levi. Now Jono is going to help us understand some of the meanings behind these names. When Jehovah saw that Leah was unloved, he opened her womb. Jehovah seems to look down and intervene for her. And Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuben. So what does Reuben mean, Nehemiah Gordon? Okay, let's go through all these names, or at least a few of them. We have Reuben, and it says, for she said, Jehovah has seen my affliction, for now my husband will love me. And Reuben is 2 words. The Ru means see, and Ben means son. So literally, see a son. And that's connected to her saying that Jehovah has seen. So she feels like he's seen her pain. God has seen her pain. And so she names her son after those emotions. Then we have the next one, who's Simeon or Simeon or Shimon. It says, for Jehovah heard that I was hated. Shimon is from the word Shema, which means to hear. Jehovah heard. And I love this word, this Hebrew word Shema, because that's the word when a Greek-minded believer says, I believe, it's again a mental attitude. But when a Hebrew believer says Shema, that means I hear and obey. It's one and the same. You can't separate the two. Again, back to Nehemiah Gordon, Jehovah heard. So then we have in verse 34, this time my husband will join me, for I gave birth to him 3 sons, and the third child she called Levi. And Levi comes from the word, I can't pronounce this one, won't destroy it. I'm not going to try. But that Hebrew word means he will join. Let's bring one more name and we'll talk about that. In verse 35, it says, Odeh et Yehovah. I will thank Yehovah, the child called Yehuda, which is a combination of the word Odeh and Yehovah. It's actually both words, Yehuda. I will thank Jehovah. Each of these names have explanations, and the explanation is connected to what the word means. The word Levi, I guess we've got to talk about that because she says, this time my husband will join me. And I'll ask Keith, he's talking to he's going to kick this one back to our Methodist minister to talk about what is the wordplay related to the name Levi and joining. Okay, Keith says, well, I think if you go to the verse for those of us who are Methodists, who are trying to find our way to connect with the God of Israel, short of having to put on a kippah in the traditional Orthodox movement or going to become converted in some way, if I want to join him myself, it says in Isaiah chapter 56, I believe it is, that those who join themselves, the very word join is the very word that's used for Levi. So when we join ourselves, we are Levite. We Levite ourselves to him. And then we become part of his covenant, part of his time, part of his Torah, part of his name. That's my Moneyball verse. And that's one of Keith Johnson's favorite phrases, Moneyball, when he hits a Torah pearl. See, Nehemiah calls it a Torah pearl, and our Methodist minister with a football background calls it Moneyball. That's what I connect to all the time, Keith says, is that I'm joining myself to him, and therefore I'm connecting to the God of Israel. Nehemiah, he responds, what Keith is talking about is Isaiah 56, verse 3, and then again in verse 6. It is this word, nilva, and or nilvim, which is those who join. It says, we join them who join themselves to Yehovah, to serve him, to love the name of Yehovah, to be his servant. All those who keep the Shabbat, which was their word for Sabbath, all those who keep the Shabbat from desecrating it and grab hold of my covenant. I will bring them to my holy mountain to make them rejoice in the house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and sacrifices shall be accepted upon my altar. Now, a lot of people read this and say, where did the burnt offerings and peace offerings come from? What's that about? This is a play on words with the word Levite, because normally a Levite brings, or actually is the Kohanim, the priest, who are a subcategory within Levi. They're the ones who bring the sacrifices. And what the Israelites thought, the Israelite thought is that a Gentile can't bring a sacrifice. But here, Jehovah is saying not only will they Levite themselves or join themselves to me, to Jehovah, but their sacrifices will be accepted. They're going to present sacrifices like the Levites present sacrifices. Not to say that they're going to be priests in the temple, literally, but if you think that they can't join themselves or can't Levite themselves to Jehovah, and you think they're separated so that you think that they can't bring a sacrifice, not only will they be joined or Levited, but their sacrifices will be accepted upon my altar, for my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations. Wow, that's a beautiful explanation. Beautiful, coming from the Hebrew roots of our faith, the Judeo roots of Christianity. Verse 35, And she conceived again and bare a son. And she said, Now will I praise Jehovah. Therefore she called his name Judah and left bearing. And we're going to continue in the next episode with Judah and learn what all these names as the family, the first family of Israel, is about to grow, ultimately, I believe, to 12 tribes. And until then, continue to study, do good, and I hope you're enjoying this as much as I am. We'll talk to you again soon.